Hey everybody, so this is just kind of a quick video to give you an overview of the icon simulation that you're going to be participating in starting this week and really carrying through the rest of the entire course, POS 273, International Relations. So hopefully you received an email from me that provided you with some information about your country assignment and how to sign up for the simulation, and clicked through on the link to explore that a little bit. And so we're going to talk about that. Something you might want to do first is download the icon simulation guide. I know it's a few pages, you have to kind of read through it, but this is really kind of the overview of what we'll be doing, and you might even want to print this off to have to refer to throughout the course of the simulation. And if you're unclear about what you're supposed to be doing at a certain point, or just kind of want to understand all of the different parts of the simulation that are going to happen, this is a good guide for what resources are available, what you should be doing, and how this thing will go forward. So that is available on the Blackboard website. And if you, let me actually hop out of here and I can show you exactly where it is on the Blackboard website. Um, yeah, so if you go into the assignment and study guides tab, there's a whole folder here of resources for the icon simulation. That's going to be the guide, and then the 3 assignments that you are doing in conjunction with the icon simulation. So go ahead and download that first, read through it, and use it throughout the course of the semester to help kind of orient yourself towards the simulation. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the simulation, just give you kind of a quick overview. What we're going to be doing in this simulation is simulating the country negotiations of the UN Security Council. So if at some point, either in your college career or while you were in high school, if you've participated in Model UN, this is pretty much the same thing. It's similar. We're doing it in a completely online environment, so there isn't a live component like you might have done in those previous simulations. But it is a simulation. It's designed to kind of role play the different actors involved in the UN Security Council, and hopefully provide you with a sense of how these institutions work, the types of decision-making, calculus, calculi, I guess, that play into a negotiation like this, and some of the kind of institutional features, both to facilitate and sometimes to create obstacles to actually achieving things in international relations. So we talk about theory, we talk about history, we talk about these kind of conceptual foundations and contemporary events, but this is really putting into practice and applying some of those things that you're learning. So I'm a huge fan of simulations. I try to incorporate them in as many of my classes as I can and have this experiential component. And I started doing this in the online version of POS 273 a few years ago, and it's worked out pretty well. Generally, students say this is the part of the class that they enjoy the most. So hopefully you have the same experience, and it's a good opportunity for you to apply what you've learned in a more abstract sense in an applied fashion. So what specifically will you be doing? You're going to be engaged in informal and formal negotiations on 2 resolutions, different issues before the UN Security Council, this very important body within the United Nations, has a lot of power to shape how the international community responds to particularly issues related to security and war and peace. And you're going to be playing the role of country representatives to the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council has 15 members. You will be one of those 15 members. And there's some institutional features of the council itself that play into who has power and who has a role of permanency on the UN Security Council. So I'll talk about that in just a second. But before I do, let me kind of walk you through where we'll end up with the simulation. So the simulation is going to end in week 5 of the course, and you'll actually be voting on those resolutions. right? So there's two resolutions, one having to do with human trafficking and another having to do with the Arctic Circle and the international community's kind of approach to Arctic territory. And there's some language on those resolutions, and you will be voting on the final version of that language. So actually what would happen at the UN Security Council. And throughout, there's a number of short assignments that uh, are designed to do a few different things. One is to just kind of help you prepare to learn about your country and their interests and be knowledgeable, and so you can play, the best possible role in the actual UN Security Council negotiations and represent your fictional country very well. But they're also designed to help you kind of reflect on what you're learning and putting into practice these conceptual ideas, and to circle back and just kind of think about how these negotiations play out, and some of the challenges and difficulties that a country might face in engaging in international negotiation. So you do 3 assignments throughout the course of the simulation, and you are expected to be an engaged and active participant in the simulation. So let me hop out of here real quick and talk a little bit about signing up for the simulation. The email that you got from me has a link in it. And if you click through to that link, it will take you to this screen. Now this is, I specifically picked the link for Chile, right? So the person who is going to represent Chile would have gotten this link, and if they click through, this is what they would encounter. And this is basically just kind of entering in your info. It's the first stage of signing up for the simulation. So there you have basic info, your name, email, and this number right here in particular is going to be important. You're going to want to write that down somewhere. 5125 is the simulation number. So the ICONS project at any given time is running a whole bunch of different simulations. And if you lost your login information or forgot your password, anything like that, that's a number that they're going to need in order to restore your access. Once you submit that form, once you give them your information, then it directs you to a payment processing center so that you can pay them the fee. It's $13, really reasonable for what you get, I think, and a fraction of what you would be paying for another course textbook or something like that. So you'll need a credit card or a debit card in order to do that. And once you do that, your username and password to log in to the simulation are sent to you through email. Okay, so that should all be pretty straightforward. If you run into any issues, if there's any complication signing up, go ahead and contact me, and I can get in touch with the ICONS folks, and we can get it resolved. I'd try to do this as soon as possible. You don't want to wait too long. There's a lot to explore on the ICONS simulation site, and you want to start to get a handle on what's there and how to utilize it. So with that said, why don't I walk you through what's there a little bit. Now, if you just go to this link here, there's a link for it actually in the Blackboard assignments and study guides folder, but you can throw it in your bookmarks. It's just www.icons.umd.edu. You'll be taken to this page, and that's where you can log into your simulation. Right? You're going to click on this orangey yellow button at the top, and here again, you're going to need your simulation number. So there we go, and that's where you'll enter in your username and your password, and then you click login. And this I don't think you'll actually see. You'll have your role and only your role. I, for the purposes of this simulation, basically play the role of an administrator. So my role here is SimCon, and I might occasionally chime in on message boards or in the council chambers. And if you see SimCon, that's me. But it also gives me the ability to jump in and play the role of other countries, which I won't do for you, right? But it does enable me to kind of demonstrate how these things work for you for the purposes of this tutorial. So for now, I'll just imagine that I was Chile and select that role. And then this is actually kind of what you will see when you log into the platform. Right? So here you have the welcome page. You have, if there were messages, direct messages between you and other country delegations, if country delegations were trying to get in touch with you, then that would show up here. It would tell you if you had unread messages. And a couple things that I want to point out that will be useful to you. First is this resources tab. That's really the first place you should go as you start to learn about your country. And there's a whole host of really useful information there, right? So one thing I will note that for the purposes of this simulation, they give us 4 potential resolutions here, right? The Arctic Circle, ethnic violence in Central Asia, development and conflict, and human trafficking in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. That's an acronym. These middle 2 we're not focusing on, right? For the purposes of this course, given that it's over the summer, it's a really short course. We're not going to try to do 4 resolutions. I tried to do that the first year. It was a lot. It was a lot of information to keep track of and things to vote on. And so I simplified it just to do issue number 1, the Arctic Circle, and issue number 4, this human trafficking one, which are good, complex issues that get at different aspects of international negotiation and the interests of different countries. So those remain there because this is just a template that they use for all sorts of different simulations. But just please remember that we're only focusing on these 2. Okay. This is going to give you an introduction to the scenario. It's going to tell you a little bit about the Security Council, your role on the Security Council, and then there are these issue briefs that just walk you through the different issues before the UN Security Council. So here, in just a few paragraphs, you can learn about the Arctic Circle, and you can scroll down and learn about this issue of human trafficking. So basic kind of overview stuff. A couple things that will be useful for you in particular is first the role sheet. So this is individualized for your country, right? It's going to tell you about your historical role, your foreign policy interests, your relation to the UN Security Council, and where your country stands on the issues, right? So it just gives you kind of a sense of who your country is, what their concerns are in the international community, and then where your country stands on the issues, what sorts of things concern you. And some might be of more concern than others. The resolutions that are being proposed might be life or death, or they could be kind of marginal. But this will tell you all of that, right? And so once you move beyond just kind of getting oriented towards what the 2 resolutions are and get a sense of where your country stands in relation to the Security Council, you can move down and start to think about, okay, where would my country actually stand on these resolutions, and what should I be trying to achieve in these negotiations? The other one that will be useful to you is entity information. So this just gives you really quick kind of overview of all of the different 15 countries that are participating in the simulation. Their historical role, whether they're a permanent member or not a permanent member, where kind of they stand on the issues, or at least what is rumored to be these countries' positions on the different resolutions. So this is really helpful once you start to think about strategy in relation to other countries. The other countries that you're interacting with, what their interests are, who your potential allies are, who might be working against you in these negotiations. So again, really helpful information. There's some other resources here that can be helpful. So the research library is interesting. These are links to external resources. Some of them just generally about the council, some of them related to specific issue areas, right? So the Arctic Circle and human trafficking, there's a whole host of resources there that could be useful to you. And then they have the link actually to the individual country missions to the UN for the 15 different countries that are participating in this simulation. So as you're in kind of the research mode, then obviously the research library can be helpful to you. And general internet resources are good too. You could just kind of search, internet sources and newspapers and see what concerns your country right now and incorporate that into your strategy. Participant guide is a lot of the information that's here is also contained in that simulation guide that you're going to access from Blackboard, but it's good that it's right here in the simulation platform as well. And there's one in particular here that really only applies to a single delegation. There's a president, rotating presidency of the UN Security Council that cycles through the different countries according to a certain schedule. And the president of the UN Security Council right now is Japan. So if you're the delegation from Japan, you want to look at these roles that you have as the president of the Security Council. It's largely a formal role. It doesn't necessarily give you a tremendous amount of power, although it kind of does because you get to set the agenda and decide in what order the resolutions will be heard, and you get to convene the council and play a role in particularly the formal negotiations and the formal voting. So one of the things that's interesting about this is like you can add things to the agenda that potentially benefit you in some way, or you can decide that the vote is going to happen in a certain way that might privilege your interests. So there's ways that you can play around with that, and this link provides you with that information. But as I said, that only applies to Japan. When you get that email from me, it does mention if there's any special roles that you have. So the president is one special role, and Japan has that role. There's also permanent members of the council, and so that email will let you know if you're a permanent member. There's 5 permanent members. The US, the UK, France, Russia, and China are the 5 permanent members. And those countries have veto power, meaning that if one of those countries votes against a resolution, then the resolution doesn't go forward, which obviously gives you an enormous amount of power. We call them the permanent 5 because they don't rotate through the UN Security Council. They remain on the Security Council always. And that veto power gives them a really, really significant amount of leverage in these negotiations. So if you're one of those 5 countries, you'll have a lot of communications to you asking for your support because your support is vital. And you also have some leverage that you can use. The other role that you can have is as a sponsor of a resolution, right? So in this case, Russia is a sponsor of the resolution on the Arctic Circle, and France is a sponsor of the resolution on human trafficking in the Middle East and North Africa. If you click on this resolutions tab, it takes you to the actual text of the resolutions. You click through, and this will say, what's there and what these resolutions would do. And the only country that can edit the resolutions, if it's decided, the international community, the UN Security Council decides that there are certain things in the resolution that they don't like, the only country that can edit those resolutions is the sponsor. This status here tells you that these are draft resolutions. They're not yet in their final form. And so at this point, and really going forward in the council proceedings, these can be edited. These are working documents. This is only version 1, and there could be 3, 4, 5, 10 different versions that emerge from this. So that's a little bit about what is on the icons platform, just in terms of general resources, things that you're going to want to look at before the simulation even starts. But in particular, I would emphasize, look at your role sheet, look at the entity information, and if you're Japan, check out that president guide so you have a sense of what you're going to need to do. That's as a basic starting point. Once the UN Security Council negotiations begin, these other tabs start to become really important. In week 4, the informal negotiations that are happening in private, this messages tab is the way that countries are going to communicate with one another. So right now, there's no messages here. No messages have been sent. But once you're up and running with the simulation, you will go here and you will see messages, and you'll have the ability to compose messages. Now, these messages, it's really up to you, the audience. So when you click Compose Message, you can send a message to everybody. You can single out specific countries, right? And you generally kind of mark off what you're talking about here. So is this about the Arctic Circle resolution? Is this human trafficking? Is this a procedural issue? And this is pretty straightforward. If you sent an email, then you know how to do this. You can also include attachments too. So if you have a link to an external resource that you want another country to look at, you can include that. The only thing I would stress with the informal messaging is that you just want to be really careful about this, who you're sending it to. So, if you're Morocco and you're sending a message to, the UK about China, and you accidentally include China, and it's something that you don't necessarily want China to hear, or if you accidentally send this to everybody, then it puts you at a disadvantage. It kind of exposes something to the public that you didn't want to be public. So just be careful with that and make sure you're sending it to the right people. The other thing I'll say is it's really important to include subjects. So some of the other countries in the negotiations are going to be receiving dozens of messages, and if you're not including a subject, once they scroll through 60, 70 messages, it can be hard for them to find that specific message that they want to respond to. So it's helpful to include a subject and be specific with that subject. And then just try to be concise with your messages, try to be to the point. You want some level of formality and stuff, but you don't want to send 5-6 paragraph messages because everybody's going to be trying to work through a lot of information. So try to be as concise as possible. So that's during the informal negotiations that happen in week 4. Countries are messaging each other in private. And then the formal negotiations, the formal meeting of the UN Security Council begins on week 5. And these messages, you'll still have access to them, but all the communication at this point happens in the chamber, and it's public. So if you had clicked on this in week 5 or even week 4, you would see that there are upcoming meetings, or if the meeting was ongoing, you'd see a current meeting. And you can access that. Everyone will be invited. The president will take care of kind of scheduling this meeting and ensuring that everybody's invited. And so that is a space in which you can communicate with every other country representative in the UN Security Council and have the formal proceedings about the resolutions, which now are kind of in their final draft form. This is also where voting will happen, right? So we do voting at the end of week 5, at the end of this formal meeting, and decide whether or not these resolutions get passed, and that will happen here. Now, if I was doing this in a typical classroom, what I would do is provide, there would be some lead up to this, some informal negotiations, people meeting in private, things like that. And then I would block out, an hour or an hour and a half in which we were going to have this final formal meeting. And everybody would be in the same room, and you'd be able to kind of address one another. We're doing this in an online environment, so that's going to be slightly different. The way that the formal meeting will work is this will be open for the entirety of week 5, right? And you'll just be able to access it, and you should be checking regularly and keeping track of what's happening and have a sense by that point of where you stand on the draft versions of the resolutions, where you're thinking you're going to vote. But it's really important that in that last week, week 5, you're regularly logging into icons and regularly checking what's happening in the chamber, so that other countries aren't waiting for your response. And in the past, this has worked out pretty well. I mean, the only issue that I've occasionally had is kind of having to prod people to actually respond to a specific question or update their resolutions or vote. If we're going to vote on the resolution, everyone has to vote, or we can't close it out and figure out whether or not it's passed. So sometimes I have to email people and just kind of remind them. But just try to be proactive and stay up to date on that. Other than that, I think that's basically what's in the platform. It's a good tool. It's simple, but it works well. And the message features are basically what we would have in any discussion forum, and doesn't crash. It's not overly complicated. Aren't a ton of glitches. If you do encounter anything, icons, we can send them messages, and they're very responsive, and they'll fix things if things go wrong. So it's pretty straightforward, and I'm looking forward to it. It's been a lot of fun in these online classes doing this simulation, and you do actually get some of that flavor of like alliances develop and strategy emerges, and some people are trying to mislead other people, and it's interesting. It's actually probably a little bit more combative than the actual UN Security Council, which tends to be pretty formal and a pretty conciliatory body. But it's been really interesting. So let me just hop back into Prezi and just kind of run through really quickly what we'll be doing with this simulation. So accessing the simulation, you're going to get an email from me. You've already received it. That has your country assignment, the special roles. So if you're a member of the Permanent Five, the presidency, if you're sponsoring a resolution, and then it provides you instructions on how to access the simulation. Like I said, it's $13 for the simulation, and you'll need to provide some method of payment for that. If you don't get that email from me, or anything is unclear, you try to sign up and it doesn't work for you, let me know immediately, and I can get in touch with Icons and we can resolve it. Don't kind of put it aside. Try to be proactive and address any issues that you're having as quickly as possible. And then you're going to want to log in to the Icons platform and just check out those resources that are available, specifically the ones that I mentioned, your role sheet and your entity information. And then moving forward week by week, this is what we'll be doing. So we're in week 2 right now. It's primarily just going to be accessing the platform and ensuring that you have the information that you need, you understand how the different features work, and just getting a handle on what Icons is. Then week 3, we move to kind of formal research and preparation for the simulation. So you're going to learn about your country. You're going to learn about these 2 issues, human trafficking and the Arctic Circle. The research that is available both for your country and just the general issues on the Icons website should be sufficient. I don't think you're going to have to crack the books of the library or do a bunch of extensive research outside of what's already there. So definitely use those resources because they're helpful. And there is a short assignment due for this week called the Pre-Negotiation Planning Report. If you go into Blackboard, that assignment's there. You can look at what you'll be asked to do. It's a relatively straightforward assignment. It's just a little bit of research on your country and its interests, and thinking just a little bit about what your strategy is going to be as the informal negotiations get underway, right? So as you start interacting with other countries, what are you going to be doing? What specific countries are you going to target and try to establish relationships with? What countries are you fearful or suspicious of? Who are the countries that definitely don't share your view on these 2 issues? That sort of stuff. And so that's due the Sunday of week 3 by the end of the day. And then week 4 and 5 are the 2 stages of the simulation, the informal negotiations, so the private messages between different countries and groups of countries. And again, there's a short assignment basically after this first week asking you to reflect on your original strategy and how it's working out, and whether your strategy has changed or there were things you expected to happen that didn't play out, and now you're kind of adapting that strategy. So that assignment too is on Blackboard if you want to look at what you'll be asked to do. And then in week 5, we have our big meeting. We have the entirety of that week will be the Security Council meeting with everybody speaking in public for the other 15 members. The president, establishing the agenda and deciding when we're going to vote and on which resolutions we're going to vote. And the voting has to be complete by Friday at 10 p.m. So one way or another, by Friday evening, late, we'll know whether or not these 2 resolutions pass. And then you have another week to reflect a little bit. I will be reflecting. I'm going to kind of be monitoring this very closely as the administrator. And so I'll send out just kind of a debrief, right? Just here are the things here's specifically what the outcomes of the simulation were. And here are some things that I noticed or seemed interesting, or here are some, alliances that seemed to develop. Here's how communication went forward in the formal meeting. Just some quick insights that I notice. But you should be doing that on your own as well, right? You should be doing that as the simulation goes forward, and then certainly afterwards. Take some time to reflect and think about what you tried to do and whether or not it worked and what your overall perspective on the simulation was. And then just kind of organize those thoughts into a final paper. The final reflection paper on the simulation is due the very last day of the class, June 25th, by the end of the day. And that assignment, too, is on Blackboard, so you can see what you'll be asked to do. That's really it. Like I said, I think simulations are a great tool to put things into practice and to apply some of these ideas. And this one has been a lot of fun. It's worked out well. The key thing I would say is there's a lot to keep track of with a simulation, and you have to be diligent, particularly given that other countries are relying on you to be active and to respond to their messages. And really, this whole thing is a lot more fun when people kind of take the role seriously and devote the time necessary to be active and engaged in the simulation itself. And so that's when it works the best. So my last little bit of encouragement is that participation is essential. You'll be graded on participation. I'm going to expect participation. If you're not participating actively, if I'm seeing that, the UK sent a message to France 2 days ago and France hasn't responded and the UK is getting annoyed, I will contact you, like your individual email, and be like, you need to respond to this message. So you don't want me to do that. And the other participants in the class don't want you to do that. So I just encourage you, particularly weeks 4 and 5, to be responsive, to be proactive, and to be actively engaged in the simulation. And that's going to result in a better experience for you, hopefully with better insights and more of a kind of experiential learning experience. But it's also just going to be more fun and exciting if the pace of the simulation is not lagging because people aren't actively participating. So we'll wrap up there for now. The very first thing that you should do is click through on that link and register for the simulation, and then start to check out some of those resources and get a handle for the platform itself. That's kind of what you're expected to do this second week of the course. And if at any point during this simulation you have any questions or anything is unclear, kind of unsure what you're supposed to be doing, just reach out to me. I'll be available during office hours. You can shoot me an email at any time. I'll get back to you quickly. And hopefully you enjoy this experience. All right, thanks a lot.